Welcome back to this new inspirational video. Today I wanted to go over the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse described by Emmet Fox. Now, one thing I like about this material is that it's pretty much very easy to follow, but yet contains profound wisdom in order for us to improve our lives. Now, maybe some of you have already heard about this story and its description because it is from the book Alter Your Life, and I'm mostly sharing these videos. When I started out this channel, I mostly did it to share these concepts with friends of mine, because sometimes they might read these books but not really have a clear understanding of what it really meant, or at the same time they might forget about what it meant, and so these videos can serve as a sort of way for people to always get back to it, to remind themselves of the power that they have within themselves due to this beautiful consciousness that we are. So today I wanted to go over only the descriptions of the 4 horsemen and not the rest of the chapter. But as I said, the book is called Alter Your Life, and you can always get a copy for yourself and study it. Now, Emmet started his chapter by saying, "The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are among the most important of the great Bible symbols, because they give the key to the nature of man as we know him. When you understand these symbols thoroughly, you will understand your own makeup, and you will be able to begin to work of getting dominion over yourself and over your surroundings." There is another reason why it is important to understand the 4 horsemen. They form a typical example of the way in which the Bible makes use of the general principle of symbolism. When you have grasped their full significance, by realizing how the Bible talks about horses, for instance, in order to teach psychological and spiritual truth, you will have mastered the general scheme of the Bible allegory. The Bible is not written in the style of a modern book. It has a method, all its own, of conveying knowledge through picturesque symbols. The reason being that this is the only possible way in which knowledge could be given to people in all ages, in different parts of the world, and of different degrees of spiritual development. A direct statement in the modern manner would appeal to a particular kind of audience, but a symbol appeals to any audience, each individual getting just what he is ready for. The Bible is not full of predictions. The Bible does not undertake to say just what is going to happen in the future, because if this could be done, it could only mean that we have no free will. If the future is all arranged now, like a movie film packed in its box, what would be the use of praying or studying metaphysics? Why did Jesus pray for so many hours, even all night long, if he could not change anything? But of course, you can change the future and the present by prayer. And indeed, it is your attitude towards prayer that makes or mars you, makes you sick or well, happy or sad, stupid or wise. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse stand for the 4 parts or elements of our human nature as we find it today. As we know ourselves in our present embodiment, we seem to be made up of 4 parts. There is, first of all, the physical body, the thing that you see when you look into the glass. Then there's your feeling nature or emotions. This is an extremely important part of you, and although you cannot see your feelings, you are tremendously conscious of them. Third, there's your intellect. You cannot see this either, but you are quite aware of its existence, because it contains every bit of knowledge, important or unimportant, that you possess. Finally, there's your spiritual nature, or your real eternal self, the true you, the I am, the indwelling Christ, the divine spark, or what you please to call it. This is your real identity, which is eternal. Almost everyone believes in its existence, but for the most part people are very little conscious of it as an actuality. Students of metaphysics are aware that ultimately the time will come when the first 3 will be merged into the 4th, and then we shall all know, instead of only believing, that the spiritual nature is all. Meanwhile, however, this is not the case, and so we find ourselves living with these 4 elements of our nature, and the Bible calls them the 4 horses. The first horse we shall consider is the pale horse, and pale means the color of terror. Perhaps you've seen terror depicted on a human countenance. I do not mean just nervousness or moderate fear, but terror. It is not a pleasant sight. The skin turns a kind of ashen grey, and that is the color of the pale horse. And his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed after him. While the pale horse means the physical body, and here we are told that he who rides on him is death, and that hell follows hard after. If you are that kind of horseman, if you live but for the body, there's nothing but hell awaiting you on this plane or anywhere else. People who live for the body are to be pitied. The body is the most cruel taskmaster of all, when it is allowed to be ruler. The person who lives for eating and drinking and sensuality brings nothing but evil and destruction into his life, right here on this plane. Remember that the person who lives for the body cannot be regenerating, and therefore he is getting older every year. That means that the body is steadily failing and he has no other resources. To him, old age brings decrepitude and emptiness, and probably pain and discomfort too. He has ridden the pale horse, and hell must follow that horseman. But the pale horse does not mean only the physical body, it means all other physical things too. What the Bible sometimes calls the world, money, position, material honors. If you put money before everything else, you are riding the pale horse, even though you are not a glutton or a sensualist. Money is your god, and you will probably get it, but you will be very sorry, because hell follows after. Why worship money after you have bought a little food, a little clothing, paid your rent, and got a few other things? What can money give you? There are millionaires walking down Fifth Avenue who find that there is not a single thing they really need that their money can buy for them. They cannot walk into any store with a blank check and purchase peace of mind, or a healthy body, friendship, loyalty, or above all, a contact with God. Other people again do not care for money, but they do crave worldly honor and distinction. They want to be important, or it is more accurate to say, they want to be considered important. They want to be the head of something. They want to be looked up to. They are not thinking of how much good they can do in the world, but of how much honor they can receive. They too are riding the pale horse, and hell follows after. If you could read the hearts of those that sit in the seats of the mighty, you would be surprised how often you would discover disappointment, for the pale horse always runs through to form. If a person accepts an important office because he honestly wants to serve others and to glorify God, he is not on the pale horse. And in his case, if things go wrong or he is misunderstood or abused, he does not care. It does not grieve him because he was trying to do God's work, and that is true success. Now this is very important. This is the ending of the pale horse description. But I'll repeat that. If a person accepts an important office because he honestly wants to serve others and to glorify God, he is not on the pale horse. And in this case, if things go wrong, he does not care. I can tell you from personal experience that this is exactly how I go about my business these days. I try to literally glorify God through my work. I try to serve others more than I try to even think of myself. This has been an attitude throughout my entire life. However, at times I have strayed away from that. And then I started to focus more and more on what he was describing here. More on myself and my own success and wealth and stuff like that. But it's true, it never brought me actual happiness. In fact, it is reminding me of the other audiobook I'm sharing currently through my channel from Wallace Waddles, where he talks about the fact that that is part of the competitive mind and not the creative mind. The creative mind being the mind of God, and the competitive mind being the mind of the world, of how society generally operates, where we're constantly in competition with each other for stuff, without realizing the oneness and unity of life. So this is something you want to ask yourself as well, is that, are you doing what you're doing because you honestly want to serve others and to glorify God? So you automatically glorify God if you know that it is the true dream that you're following. So if your dream is not one of, how to best describe it, if it's not egotistical in the sense that you just want this dream just to outshine others and to be seen as great and brilliant or something, if you can sense this dream that you're following comes from the depths of your being, you're really passionate about it, you're really truly in love with it, and you really want to share what you're passionate about with the world, you're automatically glorifying God because it was always God that gave you the dream to begin with. And so there's nothing in between you and the dream and its expression other than a simple divine flow of energy, of ideas, of inspiration, without worrying and caring so much about what it really means in the world, of what you're going to get in return. Again, this is like saying it is more blessed to give than it is to receive, and the Lord loves a cheerful giver. These things were all written to us, and they tie in beautifully into what Emmet Fox just described in that last paragraph. He went on with one more sentence. He who lives to eat and drink, the sensualist and the drug addict, he who lives for money or worldly honors, is the rider on the pale horse. This is very important and kind of shocking if you think about it as well. The sensualist and the drug addict. There's many drug addicts out there, but if we then consider, are they all riding the pale horse? Maybe we've been drug addicts ourselves. Maybe you're one currently, I don't know, I hope not. Maybe you know people that are. They are all riding the pale horse as long as they keep going with their addiction. And now that you know this, perhaps you can even help them get out of it. Now next, Emmet Fox is going to take towards the red horse. And it said in scripture, "And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon, to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another, and there was given unto him a great sword." Now what is the red horse? The red horse is your emotional nature, your feelings. Your human mind, as you know it, consists of two parts, intellect and feeling, and there is nothing else. Every thought that you can think has two parts, a knowledge content and a feeling content. And so you always get these two things, knowledge and feeling. Knowledge belongs to the intellect and feeling, of course, to the emotional nature. In some thoughts, the knowledge content is much greater than the feeling content, and in other thoughts, it is the feeling content that is greater. In mathematics, to take an extreme case, the feeling content is almost absent. No one gets very emotional over the knowledge that any two sides of a triangle are together greater than the third side, or that when two straight lines intersect at vertically opposite angles are equal. A small emotional content does exist, because definite and certain knowledge always gives a little satisfaction to the mind. And there is also a certain beauty in these mathematical truths, but it is still true that for most people the amount of feeling would be quite small. On the other end of the scale are thoughts connected with religion and politics. We all know how full of feeling these subjects are. People feel so strongly about them that they are generally full of taboos at social gatherings, and yet the amount of real knowledge that most people have concerning them is surprisingly small. For instance, few people have really studied the doctrines of the particular church to which they belong, yet they feel very strongly about them and are apt to resent the slightest criticism concerning them. Few people have carefully considered the political principle underlying their own political party, nor have they taken the trouble to familiarize themselves with very much data on the subject, in spite of which they will be heatedly partisan. On these and other questions, people have a mass of feelings almost unenlightened by the intellect. The intellectual content of such thoughts is very small. It is very dangerous to allow your emotions to have control, to allow the red horse to run away with you, for he will undermine your health and wreck your life in every phase. The red horse is just as dangerous as the pale horse, but of course he is not so base, and for this reason he wrecks many more lives. An adult person is a person who has control of his feelings. A person who cannot control his feelings is still a child, even though he be 100 years old. This is so powerful and very confronting, because many people really are stuck in this place. They don't control their feelings. For a long time I've studied metaphysics, but then I wasn't in control of my feelings. It has only been in the last few years that I've really taken this serious, started to analyze for myself. What am I feeling, why am I feeling, and can I control what I feel? I remember in 2012, I once told my own dad, I think this is the highest achievement a human can reach, is that they control their mind and the way they actually feel. For if I can control how I feel, I can control how I act and where I'm gonna grow in my life. It is so obvious, but yet most people miss this entirely. If they feel bad, they want to run away with the bad feeling and cause all sorts of destruction. Even I have to always be careful and mindful of when this happens, because it can still sneak up onto me. It can happen to the best of us, where if it is a strong emotion, temporarily you might lose control of yourself. Maybe not in very crazy extreme ways, but still there's a loss of control if we don't watch out. And that is what Emmet is warning us about, is that we have to take control of it, or else we're still pretty much like children. The fact in reality is we are always children. We're children of God for all of eternity. But in this sense, we're even greater children if we can't control our emotions, because we're going to go all over the place. Something bad happens and you instantly want to get revenge or go crazy. Something good happens and you're instantly full of joy and over-the-top excitement. But you want to keep a balanced emotional state of mind. And you can do that by learning to take control of it, by actually becoming aware of when you're losing control to begin with. Now, Emmet Fox went on to say, if you cannot control your emotions will control you and wreck you. This does not mean that emotion or feeling is a bad thing in and of itself. It means that uncontrolled emotion is a bad thing. As a matter of fact, it is almost as bad to have too little emotion as too much. People who are emotionally weak never amount to anything. They are those very nice people who are never considered or even noticed. No one knows or cares whether they are in the room or not. They drift into life seemingly by accident, and they drift into a business where they never amount to anything. They drift into a marriage, and finally they drift off into the grave. All seemingly more or less by inadvertence. A strong emotional nature is like a great powerful automobile. If you control it, it is a fine thing. It will take you wherever you want to go, to the roughest country or to the top of a mountain, because it is full of power. But if you do not control it, if you do not understand how to steer it, or if you are stupid and step on the gas when you ought to step on the brake, the car destroys itself and you with it, just because it is so powerful. If you get an old feeble car which can hardly chug along, it won't get you anywhere, but it won't do you any harm either. Even if you run it up against a wall, it only coughs and stops. A strong emotional nature is a splendid endowment, if you are the master. But if it is mastering you, you are riding the red horse. And if you are riding the red horse, you had better get off as soon as possible. There is no salvation for that horseman. How do you know if you're riding the red horse? Well, if you get excited over nothing at all. If you get angry and indignant about trivials, particularly when it happens to be none of your business. If you get worked up over things you read in the newspaper, if you're trying to run other people's lives and getting excited about that, then you are riding the red horse, and you had better get off. The time when you learn to control your feelings is the time you will begin to make something of your life. Yes, this is so true. I hope you believe in this. I'm sure you have some experience or awareness on the matter by now, if you've been following my content for a while. I've heard about this from some people in private. They keep studying the ideas that I share in this case, and it really helps them. It makes them feel so much better on a daily basis. It's like they feel a weight is constantly lifted off of their soul more and more, and they feel more and more in harmony with the positive side of life. You know what it is? I'm simply making them aware of who they really are. That's all I'm doing. It's not because of me that people feel great. It's because they are getting rid of their own ignorance. So in this case, the time when you learn to control your feelings is the time you will begin to make something of your life. Because if you can feel great no matter where you stand, in a balanced way of course, but if you feel optimistic and positive and in harmony with the spirit of all life, with God, well then you can grow in a much greater direction, because you're not being held down and held back by all these negative emotions that might run the show. Now Emmet went on to say, next I come to the black horse, and here it says, and I beheld a black horse, and he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts say, a measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny. A pair of scales, that is, a balance such as a grocer or a druggist uses, is here a symbol of famine or lack. It means that there is not enough to go round, and therefore that things have to be rationed. The black horse stands for the intellect, and if you ride the black horse, you will get famine or starvation of the soul. Very few people ride the black horse as compared with the number of those who ride the red one, but some do, and the civilized world as a whole has been riding it for several centuries. To ride the black horse does not mean having a good intellect. That is not a bad thing at all. In fact, a great many people, particularly in the religious world, would be much better off with a little more intellect than they have. Riding the black horse is letting your intellect dominate you to the exclusion of the emotional and especially of the spiritual nature. It is a good thing to have the intellect well trained and polished by use, but it is a misfortune to let it be the master. There are people who say that the universe can be understood intellectually, that everything about God can be put into plain English and explained precisely in words. This is absurd because it is really an attempt to define the infinite, and as Spinoza says, to define God is to deny him. Other people dogmatize and say that nothing exists but matter, and that mind is a secretion of matter, and that therefore mind cannot dominate matter, and man cannot survive death because he cannot take his body with him. These people say that the brain thinks, and that when the brain rots in the grave, the thinker cannot be alive. There are other people who would resent being called materialists. They say that they cannot believe in prayer because the laws of nature are deterministic and therefore prayer could not possibly change anything. All these people are riding the black horse, and yet they suffer famine because such mistaken beliefs starve them of all spiritual understanding and growth. Intellect is an excellent thing, and indeed we could not live on this plane without it, but intellect can only deal with three-dimensional things. Beyond that it breaks down. We must have the intellect for buying and selling, for putting up buildings and making roads, for doing our daily work, in short. But as we approach God, we leave the territory of the intellect and go beyond it into the region of the spiritual, where the values are perfection and dimension is infinity. The truth about God must go beyond the intellect, and it calls for the spiritual nature to understand it. The instrument of the intellect is reason. And while it is true that anything that contradicts reason cannot be true, the truths of religion must go beyond reason, though without, of course, contradicting it. The intellect cannot give you the truth about God, and to suppose that it can is like trying to use a thermometer to weigh a package, or to try to use a pair of scales to measure the temperature of the room. When you do that, you are confusing your instruments. If you try to live without knowledge of God, without prayer or spiritual contact, you are certain sooner or later to reach a condition of depression and disappointment, for that is the fate of the horseman on the black horse. In the 19th century, many men of science did not believe in anything that could not be isolated in a test tube or examined under the microscope. These materialistic scientists rode the black horse. But today, some of the most eminent natural scientists are beginning to recognize the existence of spiritual things. Western civilization has been definitely riding the black horse since the close of the Middle Ages. The Renaissance rediscovered the intellect, and that was a splendid achievement. But Western civilization did not keep the intellect in its place. It was allowed to become the master. Ever since then, our form of education has been predominantly intellectual, to the neglect of other things. Especially has this been the case since the modern age began with the invention of a commercially practical steam engine in the middle of the 18th century. Now he goes on to give some examples of World War and how humanity is using their intellect to build weapons of mass destruction instead of building their ways to closer unity with God, which shows the, again, childish nature and ignorant nature of humanity as a whole. But the horseman on the black horse is like the pilot who spends the whole day taxiing around the ground, never soaring up. Now a plane is not built to run on the ground. Even the cheapest and oldest automobile will go better on the ground than the best airplane. The plane is built not for the ground, but for flying through the sky. And until it does leave the ground, it is not in its element. So what he's essentially saying is that we have to use our intellect for good, for the positive, for the uplifting, for eternal truths, for unity. Have you been doing this? This is a lifetime piece of work, you could say. It's not something you do every now and then, entertaining and working with your intellect in the right way, in the most divine way possible. This is a dedication to the truth forever and ever and ever, while you're physically here at least, and beyond the grave even. But for now we don't really have to consider those parts of life. We are dealing with the immediate presence in which we find ourselves. And in order to make something great out of it, we're going to have to use our intellects in uplifting, positive ways. instead of finding faults with everybody else and ourselves and fighting each other based on our knowledge on things, we can say, you have a point of awareness, I have a point of awareness. The way you look at a situation is valid from your point of view. The way I look at a situation is valid as well. So then you're using your intellect to understand again still that unity. The unity being, I'm a point of awareness and you are a point of awareness within this universe. Therefore, there's no reason to really fight each other, but that is what the world is doing for the most part. But on an individual basis, we want to get away from all of that. Now, Emmet went on to talk about the fourth horse. And here we have the solution of all our problems. And the scripture said, I saw, and behold a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. The white horse is the spiritual nature, and the man or woman who rides the white horse gets freedom, and joy, and ultimate happiness and harmony. Because the white horse is the realization of the presence of God. When you put God first in your life, when you refuse to limit God, when you will no longer say that God cannot do something, when you trust God with your whole heart, you are riding the white horse, and it is only a question of time until you shall be free, when the day will break and the shadows flee away. The white horse will carry you to health and freedom and self-expression, to a knowledge of God, and finally to the realization of Him. On the white horse you will go forth conquering and to conquer. We are told very interesting things about the horseman on the white horse. The Bible says that he that sat on him had a bow. The bow and arrow is an ancient symbol of the spoken word. The spoken word brings things to pass. When you speak the word, you shoot an arrow. It goes where you aim it, and it cannot be recalled, nor can it return void. Note that the word does not have to be spoken audibly. Silent prayer is usually more powerful than audible prayer. But if you find it hard to concentrate because you are worried or afraid, you will find it easier to pray audibly. The horseman on the white horse speaks the word. The rider on the white horse wears a crown, and the crown has always been the symbol of victory. Whoever wins in a struggle gets the crown. The Greeks used to give a crown of palms to the winner of a race, and all through history kings have been crowned. The crown is a symbol of victory, and the rider on the white horse is always the victor. This then is the story of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. If you want peace of mind, if you want healing, happiness, prosperity, and freedom above all, if you want an understanding of God, there is only one way. You must ride the white horse. If you are interested only in material things, or if you are letting your emotions run away with you, or if you are trying to judge eternal values by finite intellectual standards, you are riding one of the other horses and only trouble can come to you. The fatal defect in the Roman Empire was that it rode the pale horse, and we know what happened to it. Our own civilization for about 400 years has ridden the black horse, and we see what has come of that. Now, however, I believe that humanity is ready, or very nearly ready, to climb upon the white horse, and we must all help it to do so in every way that we can, by prayer and by personal example. The horseman on the white horse goes forth conquering and to conquer. This then is the way in which human nature as we know it is made up. We seem to have four elements, but as a student of metaphysics, you know that only one of these is real and eternal. This, of course, is your spiritual nature. Someday you will realize this, and then the other elements will fade away into nothing, leaving you spiritually complete and perfect. That event, however, will not come yet. And in the meantime, you have to understand your own nature in order that you may control it. And that's where I wanted to stop this part of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, because now he's going to go on with many more examples in this chapter alone. But I just wanted to share with you through this video these four horsemen because they show the symbolism behind your own consciousness. So this final one is very important, the most important in fact, at the end of the day. And that's what my whole channel is about also, to teach people, to show them how to make use of their spiritual nature so that they can discover how powerful they really are. And once you discover more and more on how to work with your own spiritual nature, I can tell you from experience, over time, as you start working with it, these other elements of your physical body, your intellect and feelings, become more and more under the command of the spiritual self, pretty much automatically, because the spiritual self will exercise so much greater power than all these other physical things combined. Now, of course, they're not necessarily physical things, I know, but we are letting the physical world control our minds all the time if we don't watch out. And once the spiritual self takes control, you start to control the physical world instead. That is your destiny. So let these descriptions sink in. Hopefully it really opens your eyes in a better way about yourself and the potential who you really are. Now, with that being said, if you're new to this channel, consider subscribing to receive inspirational videos on a regular basis. And never forget, dear viewer, that we are the dreamers.